In a cozy little house with a garden full of bright red roses lived Sarah. Her heart was as warm as the summer sun, and her hands were always busy, whether baking cookies or mending tiny ripped knees. From the moment she held her first child, Mark, Sarah knew her life's purpose had changed forever. A few years later, little Lisa arrived, making their family complete. Sarah loved her children more than words could say. She saw their bright smiles and heard their happy giggles, and those sounds were like music to her ears. Before Mark and Lisa, Sarah had big dreams. She loved to paint vibrant pictures, imagining her art hanging in fancy galleries. She also dreamed of traveling the world, seeing tall mountains and wide blue oceans. But when her children came along, those dreams gently took a back seat. She didn't mind, not one bit. Her new dream was to give Mark and Lisa the very best life she could. She believed that being a mom was the most important job in the whole wide world. Every day she poured all her love and energy into raising them, making sure they felt safe, happy, and cherished. Sarah would spend hours helping Mark with his homework, even when she was tired after a long day. She taught Lisa how to bake her famous apple pie, patiently guiding her small hands. She was there for every school play, every scraped knee, and every bedtime story. Her children were her world, her universe. She thought of them as the two brightest stars in her sky. Giving up her own wants felt easy, because seeing her children thrive brought her so much joy. She truly believed she was building a strong, loving family, a place where they would always belong. Sarah's devotion to Mark and Lisa wasn't just about love. It was built on countless acts of giving up her own comfort. Her days were long, starting before the sun peeked over the horizon and ending long after the children were tucked into bed. To make sure they had new school clothes, good food, and fun toys, Sarah often worked 2 jobs. During the day, she was a kind librarian, surrounded by stories she wished she had time to read. In the evenings, she cleaned offices, humming soft tunes to herself as she polished desks and emptied trash cans. Her feet often ached, and her back sometimes felt stiff, but a picture of Mark's happy face or Lisa's excited squeal could make all the tiredness melt away. There were times when friends invited her to go out, to a movie or a quiet dinner. Sarah would always politely decline. "I need to be home for the kids," she'd say with a gentle smile, even though a small part of her longed for a night out. Vacations were also a luxury she couldn't afford for herself. Instead, she saved every extra penny for family trips to the local park or a special day at the zoo, watching her children's eyes light up with wonder. These moments were her true reward. One winter, Mark needed new boots for school, and Lisa wanted a bright red coat. Sarah's own coat was thin and worn, but she didn't hesitate. She bought them the best she could find, wrapping them in warmth while she shivered a little on her way to work. It wasn't just money, it was time, energy, and personal desires that Sarah placed on the altar of motherhood. She rarely bought herself anything new, always making do with what she had. Her own needs always came last, a silent promise she kept to her children, believing that her sacrifices would build a foundation of love and security for them. Even with all the hard work and quiet giving up of her own desires, Sarah's heart truly sang when she saw her children. Watching Mark learn to ride his bike, wobbling at first, then speeding down the street with a triumphant grin, filled her with a joy deeper than any painting could have given her. She clapped the loudest at Lisa's dance recitals, her eyes shining with pride as Lisa twirled across the stage, a tiny star. These moments, big and small, were the treasures she collected. She might have missed out on faraway lands and quiet evenings reading, but Sarah wouldn't trade the sound of Mark's laughter ringing through the house or Lisa's warm hugs for anything. She felt a deep happiness watching them grow from wobbly toddlers into curious children, and then into thoughtful teenagers. When Mark graduated from high school, standing tall in his cap and gown, Sarah felt a rush of pride that swelled her chest. She remembered helping him with his first alphabet letters, and now he was ready for college. Later, when Lisa got accepted into her dream art school, a place Sarah herself might have wished to attend, there was no sadness for herself, only pure, beaming happiness for her daughter. Go chase your dreams, sweetie, she'd said, her voice a little thick with emotion, as she packed Lisa's bags. Seeing her children find their own paths, strong and confident, made every sacrifice feel worth it. It was like watching a beautiful garden bloom because she had watered it with all her love and care. She believed her greatest masterpiece was not on a canvas, but in the lives of her beloved children. As Mark and Lisa grew into young adults, Sarah watched with a proud heart as they stepped out into the world. Mark found a good job in another city, working long hours to build his career. Lisa, with her bright artistic mind, moved to a bustling town to pursue her passion, spending her days in studios and galleries. Sarah understood they needed to spread their wings, just like she had taught them to fly. At first, the calls and visits were regular. Mark would call every Sunday, telling her about his week. Lisa would send pictures of her latest paintings and visit for holidays. But slowly, like a gentle tide pulling back from the shore, the frequency changed. The Sunday calls from Mark became bi-weekly, then monthly, often ending quickly because he was, quote, so busy. Lisa's visits grew farther apart, sometimes skipping a holiday because of a new art show or a special project. Sarah would try to call them, but often got their voicemails. I'll call you back, Mom, Mark would text, and sometimes he did, days later. Lisa would promise to visit soon, but soon stretched into months. Sarah found herself looking at her phone, waiting for it to ring, especially on quiet evenings. The house, once full of laughter and noise, began to feel too big, too still. She told herself it was normal. They're just busy building their lives, she'd whisper, trying to make her heart believe it. But a tiny ache began to settle in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Her children, her masterpieces, were creating their own worlds, and in those worlds, there seemed to be less and less room for her. The quiet ache Sarah felt turned into a sharp, painful realization one cold autumn evening. She was 61, and her birthday had just passed. No cards had arrived in the mail, only a few quick texts from Mark and Lisa, wishing her a happy day. No phone calls, no visits. The silence in her house felt heavier than usual. She sat at her kitchen table, a half-eaten slice of cake before her, and stared at the two empty chairs where Mark and Lisa used to sit for every birthday dinner. A sudden, clear thought hit her like a chilly breeze. Her children were truly gone from her daily life. Not just busy, not just distant, but gone. The constant presence, the easy chatter, the shared meals, the simple knowing they were just a call away for anything important. It was all gone. She remembered years ago, when Mark had a fever and she stayed up all night, cool cloths on his forehead. Or Lisa, when her heart was broken by a silly boy crying into Sarah's shoulder. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different person, a different time. Now her phone lay silent. The roses in her garden still bloomed, but there was no one to share their beauty with. The house, once a hub of activity, felt like a museum of past joys. A wave of profound sadness washed over Sarah, making her shoulders slump. Loneliness, a cold, heavy blanket, wrapped itself around her. She had poured her entire being into her children, making them her world, and now that world felt empty. The sacrifice, once a source of deep joy, now felt like a gaping hole in her heart. She was alone. The sadness that washed over Sarah was quickly joined by a sharp, stinging hurt. It wasn't just that her children were gone, it was the confusion that twisted in her stomach. Did I do something wrong? She whispered to the quiet kitchen, her voice barely a breath. She replayed years of memories in her mind, searching for a moment, a word, a mistake she might have made. Had she been too strict? Too soft? Had she loved them too much, or not enough? She remembered all the sacrifices, the choices she made to put them first, and a bitter taste filled her mouth. Was this the reward for a lifetime of devotion? To be forgotten, to be set aside like an old book no longer needed? Her mind raced, trying to find a reason, an explanation for this sudden emptiness. She picked up old photo albums, flipping through pages filled with happy faces. Mark's missing front tooth, Lisa's messy pigtails. In every picture, Sarah was there, a loving presence, a constant support. She saw no anger, no harshness, only endless love. The confusion deepened. How could children, for whom she had given her entire self, simply drift away without a backward glance? It felt like a riddle she couldn't solve, a puzzle with missing pieces. She felt like a gardener who had tended her plants with all her might, only for them to bloom beautifully and then fly away, leaving her alone in the empty patch. The hurt was a heavy weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She longed for an answer, a simple reason, anything to make sense of the void that now echoed in her once full life. For weeks, Sarah moved through her days like a ghost in her own home. The vibrant colors of her garden seemed dull, the scent of her roses unnoticed. She would sit for long stretches, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, her mind replaying the tape of her life. She saw herself, younger, full of energy, always doing, always giving. She remembered the early mornings, the late nights, the times she went without so her children wouldn't have to. Every corner of the house held a memory. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe, where Mark and Lisa had measured their growth, year after year. The worn armchair in the living room where she'd read countless bedtime stories. The small desk in Mark's old room, still holding a dried-up pen and a forgotten drawing. Each item was a silent witness to a life poured out, a heart given fully. She felt utterly lost. Who was Sarah without her children's needs to guide her? For so long her identity had been Mom. Now, that title felt like an empty echo. She had no current projects, no personal dreams waiting to be picked up. Her own life, her own interests, had been carefully packed away, like old clothes in an attic, to make room for her children's futures. Now, the attic of her soul felt dusty and forgotten. She had given everything, and now she felt like nothing was left for her. The world outside her window continued, but Sarah felt stuck, adrift in a sea of memories and a profound sense of having lost her way. One sunny morning, as Sarah sat by her window watching a robin build a nest in the rosebush, something shifted inside her. The little bird worked tirelessly, feather by feather, twig by twig, creating a home for new life. Sarah had been watching it for days, and today, for the first time in weeks, a tiny flicker of warmth sparked in her chest. She thought about the robin, not giving up, even when a twig fell or the wind blew. Then, she looked at her own reflection in the windowpane. Her eyes looked tired, her shoulders slumped. "This isn't me," she whispered, a sudden strength rising in her voice. "This isn't who I am." She remembered the strong, cheerful woman who had faced every challenge for her children. She had been sad, she had been confused, and she had felt lost. But she realized she couldn't stay that way forever. She deserved more than a life lived in the shadows of past happiness. A quiet resolve settled over her. Her children had their lives, and she had given them a good start. Now it was time for her to live. Her story didn't end with their goodbyes. It was time to write a new chapter, one filled with her own joys and discoveries. The sadness was still there, a soft hum in the background, but a new, stronger melody began to play. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope. She was going to find joy again, not for her children, but for herself. With that small spark of hope guiding her, Sarah looked around her house with new eyes. Her gaze fell on a dusty box in the back of a closet. Inside were her old paintbrushes, stiff and dry, and tubes of paint, some hardened. Next to them lay a half-finished canvas, a vibrant sunset she had started years ago, before Mark was born. A wave of memories, sweet and a little sad, washed over her. She remembered the pure joy of mixing colors, the way the brush felt in her hand. Hesitantly, she pulled out the box. The next day, she went to a small art supply store she hadn't visited in decades. The smell of fresh paint and canvas filled her with a forgotten excitement. She bought new brushes, fresh tubes of bright colors, and a clean white canvas. Back home, she set up a small easel by the window, the same window where she watched the robin. At first, her hands felt clumsy, the colors not quite doing what she wanted. But she kept trying, remembering the feel of the strokes, the magic of bringing an image to life. Slowly, the sunset began to glow again. Beyond painting, her garden called to her. For years she had only tended the roses, keeping them neat. Now she began to explore. She bought packets of flower seeds, tiny promises of future beauty. She spent hours digging in the rich soil, planting marigolds, zinnias, and sunflowers, feeling the earth between her fingers. Her back might ache a little, but the fresh air and the simple act of nurturing something new brought a quiet contentment. These forgotten hobbies weren't just pastimes. They were like old friends, welcoming her back, helping her find pieces of herself she thought were gone forever. As Sarah's canvas began to fill with color and her garden bloomed with new life, she realized something else was missing: people. For years, her social life had revolved around playdates, school events, and hurried chats with other parents. Now that circle was empty. Taking a deep breath, she decided to step out of her quiet world. She saw a flyer at the local library. Community Garden Club. All skill levels, welcome. Her heart gave a little flutter. The next Saturday, she nervously walked to the community garden, carrying her gardening gloves. She met Martha, a woman with kind eyes and a hearty laugh, who showed her how to plant tomatoes. She met Mr. Henderson, a retired teacher who shared tips on growing the biggest pumpkins. Soon, Sarah was not just planting seeds but sharing stories and laughter. She learned that Martha had a passion for baking, and Mr. Henderson loved old detective novels, just like Sarah used to. Emboldened by this new connection, Sarah also looked into art classes. She found a local group that met once a week to paint and talk. It was daunting at first, sharing her half-finished sunset with strangers, but the other artists were welcoming, offering gentle advice and sharing their own struggles and triumphs. They admired her use of color and encouraged her to try new things. Sarah found herself looking forward to these gatherings: the lively chatter, the shared passion. The loneliness that had once wrapped around her began to unravel, replaced by threads of friendship and belonging. She was no longer just the mom in the quiet house. She was Sarah, the painter, the gardener, the friend. Her world was slowly but surely growing bigger and brighter. One warm afternoon, Sarah was in the community garden, her hands covered in soil, planting bright red geraniums. Martha was beside her, humming a cheerful tune. Suddenly, Martha paused, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Sarah," she said, "your roses at home are just beautiful. I was wondering if you could give me some tips on getting mine to bloom so well." A genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners, spread across Sarah's face. It wasn't just a polite request. It was an acknowledgement of her skill, a shared interest. She felt a warm glow in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known for a very long time. It was the simple pleasure of being valued, of having something to offer, not as a mom, but as herself. She spent the next half hour happily explaining her secret for rich soil and pruning techniques, Martha listening with great interest. Later that week, at her art class, Sarah was working on a painting of her rose garden. She had captured the delicate folds of the petals and the way the light caught the dewdrops. Her teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Evans, walked by and stopped. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft, "this is truly lovely. You have a wonderful eye for color and detail. It really brings the beauty of nature to life." Sarah's heart swelled. She looked at her painting, then at Mrs. Evans, and then out the window at the real roses. A profound sense of happiness, pure and clear, bubbled up inside her. It was a joy that came from creating, from connecting, from simply being Sarah. It was a joyful spark, bright and undeniable. As the days turned into weeks, filled with the scent of paint, the feel of soil, and the warmth of new friendships, Sarah had a quiet realization. It wasn't a sudden burst of understanding, but a gentle unfolding, like a flower opening its petals to the sun. She was sitting on her porch swing, looking at her vibrant garden, a half-finished canvas drying beside her. The memories of Mark and Lisa were still there, like soft whispers, but they no longer brought the sharp pain they once did. She thought about the emptiness she had felt just months ago, the belief that her life had lost all meaning when her children stepped away. Now she saw a different picture. Her life was not empty, it was simply changing shape. The space once filled by constant mothering was now filled by her own colors, her own growth, her own connections. She realized that her purpose wasn't just to be a mother, but to be Sarah, a woman with her own unique gifts and passions. The laughter shared with Martha, the quiet focus of her painting, the joy of seeing a tiny seed sprout, these were all new meanings, new joys. Her life still had a deep richness, a beautiful tapestry woven with different threads. She didn't need her children at the center of her world for it to be full. They were a precious part of her story, but not the whole story. This realization brought a profound sense of peace. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, allowing her to stand taller, breathe deeper, and embrace the beautiful unfolding journey of her own life. As Sarah's inner world grew richer, her outer self began to change too. The tired look in her eyes softened, replaced by a bright sparkle. Her shoulders, once slumped with sadness, now held a confident ease. She walked with a lighter step, a small, contented smile often playing on her lips. It was a subtle transformation, but her friends at the garden club and art class noticed. Martha often said, "Sarah, you're positively glowing these days." Sarah found herself talking more, sharing her thoughts and ideas with newfound ease. She no longer worried about filling silent moments. Instead, she embraced them, knowing her own company was enough. She started wearing brighter clothes, adding a splash of color to her wardrobe that mirrored the vibrant paintings she now created. There was a newfound strength in her voice when she discussed her gardening plans or described a new painting technique. She felt a deep sense of pride, not just in her blooming garden or her finished artwork, but in herself. She had faced a deep sorrow and had found her way back to joy, all on her own. This wasn't a joy given to her by others, but one she had carefully built piece by piece. She stood taller, her head held higher, knowing she was a woman of resilience and spirit. She was proud of the beautiful life she was creating, a life that was truly her own, filled with purpose and happiness. This new confidence was like a warm light, shining from within her, making her feel truly alive and strong. Even with her shining confidence, Sarah's love for Mark and Lisa remained a constant, gentle flame in her heart. She still thought of them, still wished them well, and still hoped they were happy. But now, the thought of them didn't bring a wave of sadness or a sting of hurt. Instead, it was a quiet warmth, like remembering a beautiful sunset. She understood that their journey was their own, and hers was now her own too. She found a deep peace in this understanding. Her happiness no longer depended on their calls or visits. She no longer checked her phone constantly, waiting for a text. Instead, she was busy living her own life, filling her days with painting, gardening, and laughter with her new friends. She even started taking short trips, a small dream from her younger days. She visited a nearby town with a famous art museum, spending hours admiring paintings, just as she had once dreamed. She took a bus to a big flower show, marveling at all the different blooms. These new adventures, big and small, were hers alone, and they filled her with a sense of wonder and freedom. She didn't need to sacrifice anything for them, she simply chose them for herself. The old ache in her heart had healed, leaving behind a quiet strength. Sarah had learned that love changes, and that letting go of one kind of happiness can make room for another, equally beautiful kind. Her journey was now truly her own, rich with discovery and the sweet taste of independence. Sarah, now 63, sat on her porch swing, not with a cold cup of tea and a heavy heart, but with a sketchbook in her lap and a genuine smile. Her garden was a riot of color, her paintings covered a whole wall in her living room, and her days were filled with purpose. She had just returned from a small trip with Martha to a nearby lighthouse, sketching the waves and sharing stories. Her children, Mark and Lisa, still lived their busy lives. Their calls were still rare, their visits even rarer. But when they did call, Sarah spoke with cheer and warmth, sharing her latest painting, or a funny story from the garden club. She no longer waited for their approval or their presence to define her happiness. Her life was vibrant, full of her own choices and her own joys. She had learned that heartbreak can leave a mark, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be a turning point, a chance to rediscover oneself. Sarah was a living example that it's never too late to find joy again, even after the deepest sorrow. Her gray hair was now woven with strands of self-made happiness, and her eyes sparkled with the light of a life truly lived. She embraced her new adventures, her new friendships, and her own beautiful journey. She was Sarah, a woman who had faced loss and found herself, proving that every life, at any age, holds the promise of new beginnings and endless possibilities for joy.